Speaking of happy, I want to remind you this is the happy talk part of the show.
This is the happy talk. Well, let's all right. And actually, that's a good segue because Howard would have wanted it that way. We got to talk about this top of the program. Howard Brody, in his previous incarnation, often referred to as NWA President Howard Brody of Tampa, Florida, passed away a few days ago. And Brian, I know you didn't get a chance to know him very well. You didn't spend a lot of time around him, but he was on the show here one time, and you probably talked more to him at that point than you did. But I'd known him since the mid-'90s in the Smoky Mountain days and the NWA days and et cetera, and didn't even know anything was wrong. Howard's another guy I haven't talked to in probably a couple years now. I think the last time I talked to him, he was trying to get me to do something that would involve me traveling, and which always said, I love you, but I can't. It's too far. I think it was Las Vegas because that's where he was living. And then I haven't talked to him, not because there was any heat, but just, I don't talk to anybody except you, Brian. I ain't got time. But I got a huge kick out of Howard, and he was a great guy, and you couldn't run him off from the wrestling business. He loved it, and he always wanted to do something. And I even joked with him that, he was, for all of his failures, and he admitted all of them, the things that, that he wanted to do that he couldn't make work or couldn't try, he still came back, and eventually, just by process of elimination, he had some winners. And for a lot of people that may not know, not only was Howard the president of the NWA during the period of time, pretty much shortly after WCW pulled out in the early 90s, through the period of time that I was able to at least do something good for them when shit stains stuck me with the NWA invasion, trying to make mockery of all the NWA talent and bury them. It at least got the NWA television time on the WWF program. And during that period, and Dennis was, what was he? Was he vice president at that point, second in command?
There was some reason Dennis definitely wasn't going to be president.
Right.
And Dennis knew that. So Dennis and Howard had a good relationship at that time, and that led to Howard being president. And I think Dennis was either just vice president or an extended, an executive or senior vice president.
Well, but anyway, they carried the banner for the National Wrestling Alliance. It would have probably faded away at that point. There were 5 member promoters, and one of them was Steve Ricard in, New Zealand. I don't think he'd promoted a show in 10 years at that point. But at least the independent promoters around the country, when they saw that there was some tie-in with the WWF, they started joining. And by the time he got finished a couple years later, I think they had like 30 members. But it bridged, and I mean, there's still nobody was doing any big business. A couple of the NWA promoters at that time were in their local areas. They knew how to promote live events, but nothing was huge. But it carried the name and the lineage and the intellectual property through to the modern day at that point. But Howard, I mean, his book is incredible because it's got so many great wrestling stories that you never heard and that you'd never really hear because he was involved with so many different people. Hiro Matsuda didn't do a ton of shoot interviews. Howard got involved with Hiro and helped syndicate the New Japan television program back when it was still a Noki's company. This is late 80s, all around the world, because he was able to develop these international television contacts, and they called the show Ring Warriors. And Howard loved working with Hiro, but you don't hear these stories about the behind the scenes meetings with Antonio Inoki and the Japanese Yakuza that Howard was along for and all this other stuff.
Herb Abrams.
Yeah, but the book, I should say, Swimming with Piranhas, Surviving the Politics of Professional Wrestling. And I'm not, Howard's gone, so I'm sure he'd appreciate me trying to sell his book now. I'm sure it's still available on Amazon, but it's just that it was a fascinating book because I ribbed him. He sent me the manuscript And it was like a fucking 1,000 pages. I said, Howard, since you were 15, have you been rolling tape on your life? And he just had amazing notes and amazing recall. But there, he lost a tour one time he was going to promote because of the fall of communism. And he was involved with all these various and sundry fringe characters in wrestling, as well as some of the, the biggest names in it. And he constantly wanted to do something good or something, productive for the wrestling business. But he's the one that, and unfortunately, a little later than we would have liked, I had to close Smoky Mountain down at the end of 1995. By, I think it was February or March, he'd been working for a year or more. He got us deals with Germany and Japan, not for large amounts of money per show, but because we had a couple hundred shows, enough money that I paid the bills off and got the full possession of the Smoky Mountain Wrestling tapes, and then was able to turn around and sell them, obviously, to the WWF and end up making my money back that I had in it. But it was all because Howard was able to do those things, and he had a ton of contacts with people everywhere. And he was motivated to do all these things. But yeah, I guess the funniest thing, because goddamn it, he wrote about this in the book, and I think he told the story when he was on the show. But do you remember his debut on Raw? Because they had called me. Vince McMahon is the one that called me, because I think he knew if Shitstain called me at home, I'd tune him out or hang up on him. And told me about, can you get these NWA folks involved? Jim, what? Yeah, what do you want? Well, and that was Russo's, oh gosh, I used a dirty word. That was his way of trying to set Jeff Jarrett apart. When they brought Jeff back that time, he would be the NWA North American champion. And because they wouldn't give the, WWF use of the world title, but there was a legitimate North American champion in the NWA, and they just did a switch and sent me the belt. So that was the thing. Jeff was supposed to be representing the NWA and North American champion. That was some way to get Jeff over. So I was all for that. And they said, can you get the NWA guys? Okay. That would be Howard Brody and Dennis Corluzzo. And I called them, and it was another one of those deals like Shitstain does. And Vince just says, okay, pal. It was like a Friday, and they need to be on Raw on Monday or whatever short notice it was. Howard has all the minute details in his book. And when they got there, I walk into catering, and there's Dennis and Howard's just realized that this whole thing was put together so quick, he was left in such a rush. He's forgotten his suit jacket. And he's got nothing he's the NWA president. He's supposed to be on Monday Night Raw. More people are going to see the NWA than they've seen in the past fucking 10 years, and he looks like a schlub. I can't remember whether it was his jacket or his whole suit. Whatever the fuck wasn't in his bag. Nobody wore suits back then, except for the people, like I was going to be on camera wearing a suit, so I had a suit, but none of the boys had shit to lend out. And it was a simpler time, and they didn't have runners that could just go to the goddamn buy whatever. So we're looking around. And Brian, guess who was the only wrestler in the locker room that had a suit, coat, jacket that could lend it to Howard Brody to be on TV?
I don't know who.
Kurgan.
Really? I didn't remember that.
And Howard is 6 feet tall, and back then maybe a portly 260, and Kurgan is 7 feet tall with a goddamn gorilla. And the fucking sight of Howard, and he knew he looked like an idiot, and he's trying to roll his sleeves up and tuck shit under his arms. And then in his book, he tells that the only story was when he met Antonio Inoki, he forgot his fucking pants. But anyway,
hey, can I tell my favorite Howard story?
Yes, go ahead.
Because I did know him a little bit because I was around Dennis's different events and everything that was going on, but I never really talked to him because Howard, he was busy and he was dealing with Dennis and he was dealing with like various different people. He didn't have time for me. It didn't seem like he'd be a lot of fun to talk to at that time. But we ran in the same circle. But I was also, mostly hanging out with Mark Carluzzo at those shows, Dennis's son. And because they like to rib people, and also at the time, him and Dennis, it was like a love-hate thing. I think it ended up being a respect thing from Howard. But, he ended up really appreciating what Dennis was and what Dennis did. And quite frankly, one day someone should honor Howard and Dennis for what they did and what they tried to do, because it was really a noble effort.
If it hadn't been for the two of them for 5 or 6 years there, the NWA would have just faded off and nobody would have given a shit.
Yeah, that belt that everyone likes to look at wouldn't be around anymore if it wasn't for them. But with all that said, Dennis and Mark like to have fun, and we all would have fun at these events. They found some machine that would let you make custom business cards, like on the fly, and print up hundreds of them apparently really, really quickly. So they made one for Howard. And this was debuted at the NWA 50th anniversary celebration in conjunction with the Cauliflower Alley Club.
Yeah.
A day with Fred Blassie and all these legends around, and Abdullah the Butcher's interacting with people, just wrestlers everywhere from past and present. And all over that hotel, including the elevator I was in, which had hundreds of them just thrown all over the floor and stuck in the wall, were business cards. The image where a company logo would be appears to be an African-American woman with an afro, and it says, Professional Mark, Booking Flop, Paul Heyman's Rat, Shit Stir, Howard Brody, and under that, in quotes, one great show every other year. If it's a bad idea, it's mine. The check is in the mail. And then it has his actual phone number. And it has his actual website, ringwarriors.com. And he was horrified. He's the president of the NWA. The last time people saw him in public, he was wearing Kirkin's coat. And now the next time these business cards are everywhere, he was horrified. After the fact, he loved it because I posted this a few years ago and I have it here. Howard replied, the greatest rib ever perpetrated on me. I was so mad at the time, but looking back, this was funny as hell. I mentioned the elevator. Howard said, that's where I first saw it, in the elevator. Laughed my ass off, to which Mark Carluzzo replied, money well spent. And then Howard said he's actually been looking for one of these cards for years because he didn't have one. So he, got a kick out of it, and it was a big funny thing, and I was happy that he talked about it here on the show, actually. He was on the Experience several years ago.
And another of the ribs, how in the old days, the wrestling announcements, NWA President Sam Muchnick of St. Louis or NWA President Bob Geigel of Kansas City, it would always be phrased that way. So I started calling him NWA President Howard Brody of Tampa, Florida, because that's where he was living at the time. Howard, even though he did all this stuff with the wrestling business, his full-time work was always in banking and with these bank systems and it was, stuff above my head. But he was a very smart guy. And then, that was to the point where even it was written that way in articles and on the Raw format. And NWA President Howard Brody of Tampa, Florida. One of the guys even asked one time, one of the young guys, why is it important where he lives? But then he moved to Charlotte. And then I had to increase it to NWA President Howard Brody of Tampa, Florida, now living in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then finally he fucked me all up when he moved to Las Vegas. But the last time that I got to see him in person, I believe, was in Charlotte when he took Stacey and I around for steak dinners and all this variety of entertainment when we went in for, I think, one of the Ring of Honor shows. And then he moved out to Las Vegas, and that's outside of my radius. But that was the phraseology reason for NWA President Howard Brody of Tampa, Florida. And I want to read something real quick, and we'll move on. But I wrote the foreword for his book, Swimming with Piranhas, because he asked me to. And I've read it, and it took me 6 months. I told him to read it, but I loved it. But anyway, I wanted to read this forward to Howard's book because it kind of works as a salute to Howard in this situation. Perseverance, persistence, pugnacity, or plumb nuts. These are all words that can be used to describe, if not indict, Howard T. Brody's indomitable spirit throughout his long and often frustrating journey in professional wrestling. In the 15 years I have known him, and this was more than 10 years ago, he has shown the same enthusiasm, sometimes bordering on glee, for every deal he has pitched me or participated in with me, whether it be a six-figure overseas TV deal or an NWA event in Voorhees, New Jersey. Howard genuinely loves being involved in the business of wrestling. Now that I've read his very candid and incredibly detailed autobiography, if I'd known how many mishaps he's had for each success, I'd have thought he was even crazier than the rest of us for wanting to be a part of this wacky industry. Howard has dealt with most of the movers and shakers in the world of wrestling, from Vince McMahon to Antonio Inoki to Dennis Coralluzzo. He has flown around the globe several times over, syndicating wrestling television or promoting foreign tours. He even appeared on Raw in his alter ego of NWA President Howard Brody of Tampa, Florida. Sometimes, as you will see from this book, he remembered to bring his clothes. But for all his achievements, Howard isn't afraid to tell you about the misfires, and at some points you truly understand the old wrestler's allusions to the business as a drug or mistress, if it made someone put up with this level of frustration. Howard is probably the only promoter in history to lose a deal because of the fall of communism. I've always loved the performing or creative sides of wrestling and mostly loathed the business side. But Howard Brody has not only concentrated on the business side for 25 years, but carved out his own niche in it. He's persevered through many crises to establish himself in several facets of our sport: promoter, syndicator, talent agent, and done it with a smile, mostly. No matter what he says now, he'll always have an eye open for a good deal in the wrestling business. Once you've been NWA president, the disease is incurable. I love this book and can't wait to read Howard's cousin Todd's book too, Jim Cornette. And Howard's cousin Todd, when Howard would get these syndication deals in these overseas markets, he had the Brody agency, but sometimes he would have an exclusive arrangement to provide programming to one person, or in some situation where he couldn't get another show to another person in that market. And then Howard's cousin Todd would suddenly show up. Of course, it helped that Howard's middle initial was T, and Todd Brody would be syndicating that programming so that he could not be in impinging or infringing on any exclusivity arrangements with that his cousin Howard might have made. But Todd never got to write the book. Anyway, Howard, we loved you. And sorry to hear the news.